I'm from England, and from a county east of London called Essex. And I don't really come from a religious family. No, they were very slightly nominally Christian, but absolutely not practicing. At least I have no recollection. So it's basically a secular family in England. I became a born again Christian when I was 23, I think it was, in my local Baptist church here in London. I moved to London in my teens and was atheist, basically. But I had a religious experience one morning, cycling back from a party, and I decided that meant I had to become a Christian, and I became a born again Christian, in an evangelical conservative Christian. But what happened to me then was belief. Then I understood it very much as a gift from God. Belief in God was a gift from God. It's not something I had before, and I wasn't able to work up an enthusiasm for belief or to intensify my belief. It's something that was given to me as a result of a specific prayer I uttered. And then I became firmly convinced in the existence of God. And that's always remained with me since. My first encounter with real Islam, rather than what the media tell me, was in my local mosque, Regent's Park Mosque, which I still go to. I was quite an Islamophobe, and I basically wanted to find out what Islam really taught from Muslims. And so I was a Christian, and I went to my mosque to talk to them, and I gave myself a couple of months, and I read the Quran in English and spoke to them, and that was my first real encounter with Muslims, and thus with authentic Islam. It was a couple of years later, after I suddenly realized that it sounds very naive now, but that really was something I had to learn, the basics, that Islam also possessed a spiritual tradition and a depth that Christianity also possessed, that I knew about. I knew about the great spiritual writers, both St. Augustine, or the great classics like Thomas à Kempis' Imitation of Christ, or The Cloud of Unknowing. These extraordinary works of spirituality. And then I discovered that there were parallel depths in Islam. And that shook me a bit, because I realized then that maybe God had bestowed his grace and his guidance and his love on people other than Christians. Because clearly, and it wasn't just that it had a profound spiritual tradition, but it was very similar in many ways to the Christian tradition at that level of great depth. So yeah, that's when I realized that there was an option, that Christianity wasn't the only religion in town, if you like, that had a profound spiritual truth at its heart. So once I discovered this great spiritual depth, then I was presented with a dilemma. What do I do with this knowledge? So ultimately, I did accept Islam, and I went to the Imam's office in Regent's Park with some friends and formally said the Shahada. And it was very nice, but it wasn't like a born again experience. I'd already accepted the truths of Islam before that. So initially, the key figure, writer, British Muslim intellectual who had a huge influence on me was a chap called Guy Eaton, and he just died a few years ago. He was from the English aristocracy. He was a brilliant writer. He was a master of the English language, and he wrote a famous book called Islam and the Destiny of Man. And this book has been responsible for the conversion of many English people, particularly middle-class English people, or like that. And it worked its magic on me. And he was a Muslim and a diplomat. He became a British diplomat. And he was a Muslim for 50 years when he sadly passed away in his 80s. So he was my mentor at first. I mean, although I still value that book, I wouldn't agree with some of the things he now says in that book. And he was a perennialist, for example. And that's not a view I've ever held. But nevertheless, he was the gateway, and someone because he was English, I understood where he was coming from, and yet he was equally at home and familiar with the world of Islam. And so he was a great bridge, a conduit from one to the other, through which I traveled over. So many other people in Britain, British people become Muslims. Some of them become quite hardcore Salafis, for example. I didn't. I became a Sufi, and only appreciated real Salafism much later. So so he was probably the biggest single influence at that time. But there've been many people who have influenced me since then. I'm wary of kind of general advice these days. And people say to me, give me a good book to read about the Bible or Christianity. I'm thinking, well, I need to know more. I need to know, is this for you? I need to know the education level, their level of interest. Do they want something more academic or more popular? And so on. There are lots of questions I would need to ask before I recommend a book, for example, or even a YouTube channel. And in the same way with books about Islam, I would want to find more about the person who was asking that question. For example, if I was talking to a Cambridge undergraduate, and I know one or two of them these days, who wants to find out more about Islam, I would certainly recommend some kinds of books and not others. You've got to tailor the recommendation to the person, their education level, their background, even their gender, even their age. A 15-year-old is different from a 50-year-old. It's just the realities of life. I think one of the things that's distinctive about Islam, which attracts me, is it provides a holistic way of life. So it's not just, when Christianity does this too, provides a spiritual path, but it also provides a holistic understanding of life. So the political, for example, is an intrinsic part of Islam. Islamic governance is fundamental. It's wide-ranging, it's comprehensive. There is no secular space in Islam. It's all through and through the same thing. And I like that. It's such a wonderful contrast to the secular Western hegemony. And I think that's one of probably the unique things about Islam these days. It didn't always used to be unique. Christians weren't always secular. During Christendom, for example, Jews weren't always secular. When they were the Israelites in the Jewish Bible, they were not secular, far from it. But Islam is the only one left standing. So I think this comprehensive, holistic vision of life that's integrated and yet not totalitarian. And this is a paradox that might be difficult for some to grasp because it's not totalitarian. It is one of the most fascinating and attractive facets of Islam, I think, for me. The favorite thing about Allah was the same thing, the favorite thing about Allah when I was a Christian. This may sound a bit odd, but I'm reminded of the parables of Jesus or Isa in the Gospels, particularly Luke's Gospel. And these parallels are very Islamic, and you find the same teaching in Hadith, you find the same teaching in the Quran. And it's to do with a God a God of grace, a God of love, who redeems, who calls people back to himself. And this is part of the truth that is still in Christianity. There are arguably a lot of things that have changed and corrupt in Christianity, and that is something that obviously exists in Islam as well. So it's not unique to Islam, but because it's not unique to Muhammad, upon whom be peace. It was a facet of all the prophets of God. Obviously, Moses was sent to the Israelites. Jesus was sent to he was sent to the Jews as well. But this is something that is shared with all the prophets of God, not just what we would call Islam today as the final dispensation. I don't like privileging one bit of the Quran over the other. They're all potentially favorites at one time or another, I suppose. But it's Surah Ikhlas, sincerity. It's the oneness of God, and it's such a profound and concise statement of Islamic monotheism, and also as an implied critique, or there is a critique of. It's been shown by many scholars, a critique there of some of the Christian creeds as well, and it's just a beautifully succinct summary of Aqidah of the Muslim belief, and it's also very beautiful in Arabic as well. So it's not just a dry old bit of theology. It's beautifully expressed, very, very, very concise in Arabic, and I think there's a hadith that says it is equal to the third of the Quran or something. I think I'm just passionate about the truth. It's not that, I must do dawah. It's I'm just passionate about the truth. There's so much in the riches of the Islamic tradition that is really worth not just talking about, but defending or sharing with people. So it's because I almost enjoy it. It's if you've got back to a parable in the Gospels, in the Christian, the parable of the kingdom of God. If a man discovers a pearl in the field, and this is a metaphor for the kingdom of God, and he sells everything that he has to acquire this pearl. And there's a similar sense in Islam as well, which is essentially the same. It's the same spiritual message, really. That if you discover a pearl, what do? I like to say other people, look, sell all you've got, because all the stuff of the dunya for this pearl, because it's worth it. The pearls, it's beautiful, it endures, it's is of great preciousness and price. So that would be my motivation, from the sheer amazingness of it, rather than any kind of imperative that one must do dawa. I would hope from my meeting with God that he will, in his grace, overlook my blunders and faults and the mistakes that I've made, that his mercy will triumph over his wrath.